mix of speaker in terms of one person representing so many different disciplines at the same time. Yehoshua Pfeffer is a son-in-law of Reuven Leuchter, the very world-famous Bal Machshava. He's a close Talmud of Rav Osher Weiss, the big Posek. He's a community Rav in Yerushalayim, and he's an international broadcaster, and I can prove that. A few weeks ago, my radio alarm woke me up on the Sunday, the BBC Sunday program, to the voices of Yehoshua Pfeffer being interviewed by the BBC as the expert on this.
This is not my preferred claim to fame.
Well, it happened. But Yehoshua Pfeffer also chairs, and this is the important thing of tonight's his credentials, that he chairs the board of Netzach Yehuda, which supports Charedi soldiers in the IDF. And wait for it, he's also a professor at Hebrew University's law school. But quite honestly, as far as I'm concerned, his biggest claim to fame is that we both share the same alma mater, because Rabbi Pfeffer is an alumnus of none other than the world-famous, prestigious Hasmonean Boys' School. How that happened, Rabbi Pfeffer, I'm not quite sure, but I know that you were in Hasmo, and I know there's many friends of yours still in London who remember you from those days. So we have, Johnny Dixon remembers him from being in actually your year. So either way around, we're very, very delighted to have you on tonight. If there are any questions at the end, which I'm sure there are, because the whole subject is one of so much, it is so topical, I can only tell you that I was seeing the Hamodia of this week. Hamodia, of course, is the mouthpiece of the Aguda. And on one page, they had a double-page spread of a soldier in uniform with tefillin on, davening in the Syrian border with the snow behind him. And the next page, there was a whole article about how we can fight the conscription, which I think sums up the dilemma in Haredi society. On the one hand, they are recognizing the fact that there are Haredi soldiers. At the same time, they're very reticent. So without me spreading anymore, I do want to say a special thank you. We always thank Shlomi Goldman and Daniel Gillis, but a special thank you to Daniel Gillis. Daniel Gillis, as we well know, is a wonderful Askan, and he's the chief executive of Camp Simcha, which has a campaign today and tomorrow. This is not an advert for the campaign, but it is to say we're very grateful to you, Daniel, for looking after our technical presentation tonight. And of course, Shlomi, who always manages to find interesting speakers, and this is definitely at the top of the list of most interesting speaker we've had. And what I mean by that is the most varied speaker who embodies so many different talents in one person. So with that introduction, Rabbi Yehoshua, we're looking forward to hearing from you. Will Charedim serve in the IDF? Thank you.
Thank you, David. It's really a pleasure to be among friends, so to speak. Certainly, of course, Johnny Dixon, an old classmate, but several other names that are eminently recognizable. And nice to be talking back to Edwer Adas, a community that I highly respect and quite familiar with from my youth. So lovely to be hosted, and thank you for the forum, for the platform. So the title did pose as a question: will Charedim join the IDF? And I think in one word I could give an answer and then go home. I think they will. But there is a bit more to unpack though, and I'll be happy to try to give you a taste. This is a short presentation, and it's even shorter given the fact that I would like to give time for questions, because it's such a multifaceted domain or area of engagement, the whole topic, the whole subject of Haredi conscription into the IDF. I think it is important to leave time for those questions and see where the esteemed audience here would like to take it. There's just a lot to unpack. What I'll try to do is to give what I see as the crux, the core of the issue, perhaps a little bit of background, where it came from, meaning how did this issue develop to where we are today, then a few words about where we are today, and then perhaps a short presentation of where we might be tomorrow. Not that I have any claim to prophecy, but just how things are developing, how things seem to be lining up and shaping up. I will say at the outset that this is among the most today #1 contentious issues within Israeli society, and #2 among the most crucial for the future of Israel, socially, politically, and just generally speaking, as a Jewish state, as the political representative of the Jewish people. The more that those Jewish people living in Israel become Charedi, and slowly but surely the population share of Haredi society is growing to become a very formidable force within Israel, the more that it becomes essential, not just on a technical level, where will we have soldiers from and who's going to be supporting Israel's GDP, but also on a deeper level. You know, to be the political representative of the Jewish people, you actually have to represent the Jewish people, and the Jewish people have to buy in to its political representation. And therefore, as Haredi society continues to grow within Israel, the importance of a participation, a sense, a certain kind of integration becomes all the more pronounced, all the more crucial for the future of Israel, really in every sense possible. And right now, of course, the army is the spearhead of that general issue of Haredi participation in Israel. To go back to David's newspaper reading, Hamodia, I would bet, don't know how many pounds I would bet, but I'd bet a few shekels on the fact of that soldier in with his tefillin on the Syrian border is not a Haredi soldier, but rather a soldier wearing a kippah sruga or some other type of kippah, but not a Haredi soldier. It would not be it would not suit Hamodia to have a Haredi soldier, because that would be an absolute contradiction of what they're trying to represent. Hamodia is trying to represent that it's impossible to be a Haredi and to be a soldier in the IDF. And therefore, even though they'll have a token picture of a non-Haredi soldier, as though to say, we're not against the army per se, but they'll say we're not against the army, but we are against our participation in the army. And yes, that is certainly part of the tension, part of the kind of inherent, I wouldn't say necessarily contradiction. There is a cohesion, and I'll speak about it in a moment, but certainly part of the friction, both within the Haredi camp and certainly outside of it. Okay, so to begin, a few words on how we got here. Maybe we'll just start from the state of Israel. Obviously, Haredi society has been around as communities, as what we would have called perhaps Orthodox communities in Eastern Europe back in the day, back before the Shoah, before World War II. But let's just begin from Israel. Nascent Israel includes a Haredi population of two types. One type of Haredi population in Israel is the old Yishuv, what we call here Yishuv HaYashan. The old Yishuv is a virulently anti-Zionist population. From their perspective, we were here before the state, and we don't want to have any involvement. Lo meduvshech v'lo meuktzech. Not from the good, not from the bad. We have nothing to do with it. The more extreme factions within that population will still fly Palestinian flags. The craziest factions will even drop in to visit Iran here and there. But that is not the subject of my discussion. My discussion will be the mainstream Haredi society, which decided, a conscious decision, not to join the old Yishuv for fear that there's a certain stagnation there, that it belongs to the past and not to the future, because there's a certain element of, I don't want to use any derogatory terms, but the new Yishuv, the new Haredi Yishuv of Tel Aviv, and later on Bnei Brak, when the Chazon Ish decided to move to Bnei Brak, and many of the Chassiduyot also moved with him to Bnei Brak, many of the leaders of that new Yishuv, they saw the old Yishuv of Yerushalayim as somehow unable to present a legitimate and a viable option for the youth, for the young, frum individuals who needed a pioneering movement. They needed something exciting. See, Zionism was exciting. Zionism was a movement that declared the Jews are returning to history. The Jews are going to have their own nation state. They're going to be represented within the family of nations and to take part in the great questions of human thriving that they hadn't really been a part of for many, many centuries. And this was exciting. It was about draining the swamps. It was about setting up the institutions of government and the institutions of state. It was about establishing the economy, about establishing the army, and so on. There was tremendous energy. And the Charedi leaders at the time understood that there needs to be a corresponding pioneering project with the same energy of youth, with the same kind of spiritedness to be able to rival the Zionist project. And that couldn't happen together with the old Yishuv. Not saying it was derelict but it wasn't exciting. And therefore, the new Yishuv was established specifically far from the old Yishuv of Yerushalayim, originally in Tel Aviv, later in Bnei Brak. What was the raison d'etre? What was the underlying aims, the goals, the vision of the new Charedi Yishuv in Eretz Israel, in Israel? Well, by contrast with Israel, Israel was everything new. Israel was all about establishing something which is different from what we had in the past. Israel looked to the years of exile, the centuries in Eastern Europe, and before that in Spain, and before that in Babylon, in what's now Iraq and Iran, the Purim story. Israel looked to all of that and said, you know what? That's a relic of our past. That isn't our future. Our future needs to be a future that has a national spirit for the Jewish people. And that national spirit requires a detachment on different levels. Not everyone had the same level of detachment. Not everyone accepted the slogan of Mi David HaMelech le David Ben Gurion, or Mi Tanach la Palmach, and all the other kinds of slogans that represent this detachment from the exilic life and the return to the nationalistic life of the Tanakh. Ben Gurion was a student of Tanakh. He did not relent from studying his weekly session in his home with a number of very illustrious participants, even while fighting the War of Independence. Unbelievable. And his favorite book, of course, was Yehoshua. We're returning to the Kibush Haaretz. That was a spirit. It's a new spirit. It's a spirit that transitions from powerlessness of exile to power of independence. It transitions from weakness to strength. It transitions from being bent over your lectern, your stender, to being upright, whether you're working the land or whether you're serving in the IDF. It transitions from what we know as a ethnic type of belonging, of identity, where the individual has his kind of religious space of how you keep your Shabbos, how you eat your fish with the bones and the flesh, and Hilchas Boirer, and so on and so forth, to a national experience where we think about the big picture of Judaism and a certain revival of the Jewish spirit in an entirely new package, in something entirely different. Well, by contrast with that, the Charedi project was a project of rebuilding, of rehabilitating everything old That's the raison d'etre. That's the basic core of what the Haredi project in Israel was all about. Think about the yeshivas. How do we name the yeshivas in Israel? Well, we name them after the yeshivas in Europe, as though to demonstrate that there's a continuous line which is unbroken, even with the terrible trauma of the Shoah, of the Holocaust. The line remains, and therefore we have Mir and Panovich and Grodno and Slobodka and all the other yeshivas and the Hasidic courts. That chain is also unbroken. And we have Vishnitz and Belz and Ger and Rachmastrivka and all the other Hasiduyot. It's an unbroken chain. The links are, albeit tenuous, because we had to go through the Shoah, and that's why we need this project of rehabilitation, of rebuilding. But the main point I want to make is that the Haredi project was a project that emphasized the continuity, the perpetuation. We're doing what we always did. We're continuing the tradition that we've received from our forebears, from our ancestors. And in this way, what developed in Israel is what I like to call two parallel lines. There's the line of Zionist Israel, and there's the line of Haredi society. Both of them, I have to emphasize, and it's important to note, both of them have been tremendous, and I would hazard miraculous successes. Israel was successful miraculously in defeating Kol Oiveha Misaviv, in defeating all the enemies that surrounded and indeed attacked Israel. Israel was successful in draining the swamps, in establishing the economy, in establishing the army, in becoming a pearl in the Middle East, the envy of its neighbors. Of course, it's far from being perfect. We know that Israel has its flaws and some serious ones, but nevertheless, an amazing story of success in the modern age. No parallel phenomena can compete with the ingathering of millions of Jews from around the world, a nation exiled for 2 millennia, returned to its land, ingathering its people, restoring an ancient language that we don't remember when it was ever spoken, as a vernacular, as a tongue. Unbelievable. Really, the mind boggles to think about the achievements of the state of Israel. But we shouldn't belittle the achievements of Haredi society too. Haredi society has grown from being maybe 2.5% of Israel's demographic, Israel's population at inception, to being, I would say, north of 14% today. The last measures, the last statistics from the Halamas, the Israel Bureau of Statistics, come to something like 14%, and today it's probably north of that, and growing. And that itself is an unbelievable reversal of the trend of religious observance. Nobody could have foreseen this. And by the way, this is why Ben Gurion, at the inception, 1949, 1950, he writes to his friend Rav Maimon, and he says, you know what, the rabbis have spoken to me, and they've asked me to support, to lend my support, and at the very least my agreement to this project of rehabilitating the decimated Torah world that was destroyed in the Shoah. And says Ben Gurion, I'm sympathetic to this project. And he was that sympathetic that he really lent it tremendous support, not just the financial support, that's important, but the infrastructure. He allowed Charedim to have their own autonomous education system, which is an unbelievable concession for early socialist Israel, where everybody has to be within the state education, the state system, except for the Charedim. The Charedim get a special exemption. They can have their own autonomy. And not just that, the Charedim also got the exemption from army service. Which is also a remarkable concession, because for Ben-Gurion, and he was very explicit about this, the army served two purposes. One purpose was to defend the state of Israel, clearly. But there was a second purpose, and that was to become the melting pot for the shaping, the molding of the new Jew, who would be the Jew of the state of Israel. A Jew no longer bent over the lectern, but one upright. A Jew no longer steeped in weakness, but one mired in strength. This was a place where the Yapi from Rechavia would meet the Sfadi Jew from Be'er Sheva, and they would fuse a common culture that was molded by the shared experience of army service. Exempting the Charedim from this is a remarkable concession. And yet Ben-Gurion was ready to do that for two reasons. Aside from the explicit reason, which he said, I would like to support this project, but there were two additional reasons for why he was ready for this concession. One reason is because Ben-Gurion, from his perspective, from his viewpoint, he was establishing a museum, nothing more. There was no way to imagine that this Haredi project in Israel could be more than a museum. There was no way to think or to imagine that the spiral, this downward spiral of religious observance, the story of religion had up until then been the story of Tuvia the milkman, the story of Fiddler on the Roof. The encounter between modernity and religion had been a disastrous one. That's what led to the whole Haredi mindset, that we need to isolate, we need to erect walls and boundaries, we need to defend our communities from these sweeping winds of change that are wreaking havoc among our communities. And that was the trend. And Israel was no exception. In every home, think of the old Yeshuv of Yerushalayim, there was no home without boys and girls who joined initially the Etzel and the Lechi and the Haganah and later the state of Israel, whether it's the army, whether it's the institutions, the Supreme Court justices were these yeshiva guys who had left the yeshivas and the communities to become a part of this energetic, vibrant, and amazing movement. And therefore we have figures like, I don't know, Chaim Cohen. Chaim Cohen is one of the most prominent Supreme Court justices, and he was there. That's where he came from, and many, many, many others. And from Ben-Gurion's perspective, this is the direction, this is the trend. You couldn't have imagined anything else. Shomer HaTzair, I met 2 weeks ago, a fellow who is in his late 70s, came to visit me in my office. He's doing a research project. He's an economist by profession. He's had enough of working with numbers and he wants to work with ideas, and therefore he's doing a master's degree, I don't remember in what, and he wanted to interview me. And he told me, you know what? I was a part of the Shomer HaTzair. I was a part of that movement, those guys who would go through Mea Sha'arim with batons and beat up all these old Charedim in a statement. This is our past. This is not our future. Get out of the past and join the future. And so that's one reason why Ben-Gurion was ready, willing to make this concession. The other reason, of course, is that he had what to gain. He wanted to have a united front signing on the Declaration of Independence. He wanted the Charedim to also be there. He wanted to be able to show the world that this was not an issue that divides the Jewish people, but rather an issue that unites the Jewish people. But history has a different story to tell. And what happened, in fact, was that Haredi society, just like Israel, became a project that met tremendous success. It was able to rebuild those Torah centers and to grow them into centers far beyond numerically, conceptually, even qualitatively, far beyond anything that our historical memory knows to tell. The same is true for the Hasidic courts. The same is true for the quality of the religious life, of the communities, of the religious services. All of a sudden, Haredi society went from being this, maximum museum, this kind of historical relic of what had once been, to be a vibrant, flourishing, energetic society that was coming up with new chumras every week to be more and more Haredi. And the Slonimer Rebbe in 1980, just to demonstrate, Slonimer Rebbe, he writes in a kuntras called Haruga Alecha. It's a kuntras on Goddess and Geula. Haruga Alecha, which is from the famous, we say it in Hoshanas, Oim Ani Choima. And he writes over there, it's a transcription from a drasha that he gave. And he writes, he says, listen, I'm looking left and right. I'm looking around. He says, I cannot believe my eyes. He says, I see Torah study on an unprecedented level. He says, I see Chasidim, Avrechim, on a quantity and magnitude that was unimaginable back in Europe. He says, we can never have imagined such a thing. We can never have foreseen this. He says, Miyulad li koleila, where did all these come from? And he says, listen, it's a nace. It's a miracle. I agree. I think it is a miracle. But it's a modern day miracle. Modern day's miracle are not the splitting of the sea. Modern day miracles go through channels that we can understand. And the channel that we understand over here is the channel of the state of Israel. Poland, Romania, Russia, Hungary. They didn't support the Haredi project. That's why in Europe, it didn't go well. By the eve of World War II, we have rife secularism. There's not much left of these Orthodox communities. Israel, however, had in Israel, Haredi society had state support, and that's why it became such a wonderful success. And of course, with the Kodesh Baruch Hu's help, no question. Bottom line, let's go to where we are today. We have these two lines, and these are parallel lines that rarely meet one another. They don't encounter each other. Haredi society doesn't buy in to everything Israel. Think about, for example, Yom HaShoah. I like to give it as an example because you would think that the Haredi want to remember the Holocaust no more than anybody else. In fact, perhaps even more so. And yet, Charedim do not participate in Israeli Yom HaShoah. It's a day that's broadly ignored within Haredi society. And why? I mean, nothing wrong surely with Yom HaShoah. We all want to remember the Shoah, the Holocaust. So what can be wrong? And the answer is, there's nothing wrong with remembering the Shoah. However, the Israeli version of Shoah memory, of memorializing the Shoah, has a message. It's not neutral. It's not just, let's remember. In Israel, it's not even called Yom HaShoah. It's called Yom HaShoah VaGvura. It's the day of the Shoah and the day of Gvura, of might, of strength. It's a day whose core message is never again will we allow ourselves to be weak. Never again will we allow ourselves to walk passively to the gas chambers. That's the transition from exile to independence. That's a transition from powerlessness to power. The day of Yom HaShoah, there was an attempt to align it with the day of the Warsaw, no day specifically, but with the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, because that's the message. And the Charedim say, 1 minute, this is not the message we want to project. We don't want to be a part of that message of never again, that part of this strong divide, this strong disconnect between the past and the present. On the contrary, we want to strengthen the connection, the continuity, to perpetuate the past, to bring it into the present. And that's why Yom HaShoah for the Charedim is a big no. This is a little bit similar to a piece written by Rav Hutner in the Jewish Observer, probably sometime in the late 70s. I don't remember exactly when it was written, before he came to Israel. And he writes, yeah, we don't want to make a day for the Shoah, and it's coming from a similar kind of mindset, that we're trying to emphasize the continuity, to highlight the perpetuation. Now, fast forward all these decades, and what happened, broadly speaking, is that we are now facing the challenges of success. Success comes with responsibility. It's not always easy to accept, but sometimes success breeds a change which is not just a change in quantity, but a change in essence, a change in who we are and where we stand, a change in the level of responsibility. What happened was that this thin, slim, slender line that was Haredi society in 1950, it thickened and broadened and grew and started to encroach upon the other line of the state of Israel. And Israel began to wake up and to say, where's this going? Israel began to say, how is it possible that such a significant part of Israel's Jewish population enjoys all of the civic rights but doesn't participate in the civic duties? Meaning, civic duties, I know that in England or in America, civic duties are often understood as paying your taxes, but in Israel, there's a civic duty that kind of dwarfs paying taxes, and that's giving 3 years of your life for army service. That's quite a civic duty. And the question began to ring in the space of broader Israeli society. What's going on with the Charedim? Is this tenable? And this began in the 80s, right? After the Charedim joined the coalition of Begin's government in 1977, and that anchored the exemptions from army service without any restrictions. Before that, there was a restriction on the numbers. After 1977, there was no more restrictions, and therefore, basically every Haredi individual, by force of being a part of a yeshiva of one type or another, was exempt from army service. And then began this new phase of the Haredi line that was getting a bit too thick, too wide for Israel's comfort. And I would say that there's 3 major challenges in that area. There's the economic challenge. Haredi men could be a tremendous force of growth for Israel's economy, for the GDP. However, because of the Haredi education system and because of the disposition to stay in learning for as long as possible, Haredi men are generally not a part of Israel's workforce, and certainly not a part of the high-level Israel's workforce. Only 50, or a bit more than 50% of working-age Haredi men are a part of the workforce, and those who are earn approximately 50% of the non-Haredi Jewish income. So that's a drag on the economy. And by the way, before October 7th, that was the main emphasis of the attempt to integrate Charedim into Israel. The main emphasis was economic, should be emphasized. Prior to October 7th, the army wasn't particularly interested in having Charedim in the IDF. They were a headache. The army had other agendas of integrating women into the IDF in every division, in every tank. A lot of religious Zionist rabbis were up in arms about this very feminist agenda, very, what we would call today, based on American influences, a kind of woke or progressive agenda. And there was a tension between that particular agenda and the agenda of integrating Charedim into the army, obviously. And therefore, the army wasn't very interested. As part of my work with Netzach Yehuda, we would speak to high-ranking army commanders, and they would tell us this straight out. It wasn't even a secret. That was prior to October 7th, but it's still true. the economy is a real challenge. Post-October 7th, of course, the main issue has become the army. And one cannot fail to understand the anger, the resentment, and it's sad to say, but sometimes the animosity that is felt on Israel's streets towards Haredi society because of the army issue. It is deeply, deeply troubling and harsh for a non-Haredi parent to see his children serve in the army, not by choice, but by necessity, not by volunteering, but by the coercion of Israeli law, and have to serve in the army. And those who are motivated and dedicated will serve often in combat units, and many have lost their lives. We should know no more losses, and many were grievously wounded, and many thousands served in reserves for the better part of a year, leaving families, children, wives to fend for themselves alone, spiking divorce rates, spiking psychological treatments, both for those who served and for those who are back home. This has been a harrowing time for Israeli society. Of course, it's been a time of greatness too, a lot of amazing heroism, a lot of deeds that will be written about for many decades still, and perhaps centuries. But nevertheless, it's been a tough and harrowing time. And I can tell you, I make a point of going to many levayas. Again, Kodesh Baruch Hu should help, we should know no more. But I make a point of going to many levayas of soldiers that fell over the course of the war. And the Haredi presence is minimal. They're not a part of it. They're living their lives. I have a friend in Ramat Beit Shemesh, and she's a part of two WhatsApp groups. One WhatsApp group is the religious Zionist element of Ramat Beit Shemesh, and the other WhatsApp group is Haredi Ramat Beit Shemesh. So the religious Zionist WhatsApp group is all about the Miluimnikim, is all about visiting the Shiva calls or the Levayas, or preparing food for different units and different soldiers, and helping the families of the Miluimnikim, and so on. That's one WhatsApp group. And the other WhatsApp group is about internet shopping, and about lac gel for your fingernails, and about normal life. And the contrast is so difficult. And therefore there's a lot of resentment and a lot of anger over this issue. And I don't think one can fail to understand where that's coming from. That's the issue of the army. And beyond those two issues, but included in those two issues, is the question of Israeli society. The unity, the cohesion of Israeli society is not dependent on this issue exclusively. Of course, there are other issues, but this is certainly one of the major issues that is straining the seams of Haredi society. I would not be surprised if in the next election cycle in Israel, whenever that should come up, could be soon, could be a while. If it's soon, it's probably because of the law, which is trying to regulate Haredi service or lack thereof in the IDF. That's the current threat to bring down the present coalition. And even if it's not in the immediate future, but in a year's time, it's definitely on the cards that the number one issue will be the question of Haredi integration. It's that dominant in the discourse, in the social discourse within Israel. But you know what? The growth of Haredi society and its new dominance within Israel on many levels doesn't just challenge Israel. It also challenges Haredi society internally for a number of reasons. First of all, when you yourself are such a dominant part of Israeli government, today, Charedim are something like 30% of the government in terms of the Knesset members, in terms of the ministers in government, that's a very significant part of Israel's ruling majority. Not just that, Charedim have members in the security cabinet making decisions about Israel's most existential questions. The Charedim are there making the decisions, and that begs the question, who are you isolating from? From whom are you isolating? What's the meaning of isolation when you're so deeply entrenched in Israel's core institutions? So yes, Yated Ne'eman will still, sorry, we quoted Hamudia before, so now I'm quoting Yated Ne'eman. We have to give some balance here. So Yated Ne'eman will still tell you the story that the reason why we serve in government is lahatzil min ha'ari, min ha'doiv, min ha'namer, u'min ha'bardalos, in order to save some crumbs from Israel's budget and siphon them towards the Charedim, the yeshivas, the institutions, the communities, the Hasidim. That's the story that we'll tell ourselves. But is that really how the Charedim see themselves? Is that rhetoric really connected to the reality of the Haredi street? It isn't. From the Haredi street's perspective, we're a part of government. We're a part of Israel. These decisions are important. We're involved in the big questions of the state. And therefore, the entire isolationist project, if you want, comes into question when you become Israel, when you are Israel. And the isolation...
I'm going to say we've just had a number of people sending in on the chat. We hear the problems and the issues and the challenges. The question is there going to be a solution? We need you to try and find that solution or share with us what is going to be the solution. Will it happen? Will it change?
How long do I have, David? Just remind me.
Officially, you're well over time, but we're all riveted by what you're saying. So carry on. But just, I think we'd like to hear what you are saying in terms of... Yeah, okay, good, excellent. Thank you.
I'm getting that. So the other challenges to isolationism is, of course, the internet. Internet age is different from television, incomparable. But let me get to the solutions. I'm happy to go there. The solution ultimately requires what I'm beginning to call a paradigm shift. A paradigm shift within Haredi society. I think that paradigm shift is already taking place. Certainly it started at the fringes, let's call it that. But what is that paradigm shift? It's a shift, if you want, from living within let us call it a Purim. We just started Chodesh Adar. Let's call it a Purim mentality. Purim is the festival of Galus. It's a festival of survival. It's a festival of HaKadosh Baruch Hu will help us to survive, to perpetuate, to continue. And that's kind of the mindset of the Haredi place. It's a mindset of survival, perpetuation, continuation. But there's another mindset out there, and that's what I like to call a Hanukkah mindset, which is a mindset of revival, renewal, of going out there and defeating the enemies and recapturing the Yerushalayim and rebuilding the Mikdash. It's a different mindset. And I think there's a shift taking place within Haredi society from the Purim mindset, if you'll allow the expression. It needs to be unpacked much more than that brief outline. But from that mindset where most of the actors don't even know exactly what they're doing. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is playing puppeteer and controlling things from behind the scenes. That's the Purim mindset, that we just have to attach ourselves to that, to the Hanukkah mindset, where we gain the confidence of taking responsibility for the future, for who we are, for where we need to go. Last week, Thursday, very recently, last week I attended the first ever Hashpa'ah. Hashpa'ah is like an initiation ceremony where soldiers declare their allegiance to the Jewish people, allegiance to the Jewish state. And I attended the very first Hashpa'ah of the Haredi Brigade, called Hashmonaim, Hasmonean. I identify with the name. It was a very moving experience. First of all, I met Talmidim, boys that I had taught in yeshivas that I taught at in the past. These are Haredi boys from Har Nof, from regular Haredi neighborhoods. They're not off the derech. They're not on the fringe. They're Haredi boys. And they decided after a couple of years in yeshiva that they want to join the IDF and to be a part of it. In fact, one of the boys was there together with his father. His father was doing Shlav Bet, doing a 6-month program that gets him from a Rova'i F2, where you can barely hold a rifle, to actual combat status, where you're able to engage in combat duty. So both the father and the son were serving in this new Haredi brigade. That was a very moving experience for me. And humbly, I think it gives us hope that within the Haredi space, there's an awakening. There's an awakening to this new responsibility. It's a responsibility that extends beyond the old contours, the old boundaries of Haredi responsibility. What is the conception of Haredi responsibility? Well, it's internal. It's the yeshivas, it's the communities, it's the religious services. It's those elements of our internal life that we take responsibility for. But everything else outside of that, that's nothing to do with us. That's about Israel. That's their responsibility. We are now in a pivotal moment where that them and us distinction is being eroded, and allowing Charedim to, on the one hand, continue to maintain the good and the pure within Haredi society. And there's a lot, there's a reason why I feel privileged to bring up my kids within Haredi society, notwithstanding the prices you pay for that. And of course, there is a risk factor here. It's not simple to say, oh, let's just be a part of Israel, let's join the army, and yet we'll be able to preserve that which we hold dear. It's not simple, but we are at a pivotal moment when precisely that issue is at the forefront of Haredi minds. The other day, this was on Friday, everything is so new. Every day you have these examples. On Friday, I was sent a video of a Haredi yeshiva, it's Yeshiva Tichonit, meaning a Haredi yeshiva that they also do Pagriyot. They're on a Poland trip. And the boys, the video was of the boys singing Hatikva, passionately singing their Hatikva. And the Rosh Yeshiva there, he was visibly perturbed. He was disturbed by this. He was like, well, guys, Torah, don't forget Torah. It's not Pashat. There's a tension going on.
Can I just stop you there I'm sorry to say this. How many people are there in the Hashmonayim Brigade? I hear there's 150. Am I right?
Yes.
150. I think it's unfair. We're talking about tens of thousands of Charedim who could go in the army.
Well, let me explain why.
Can I just tell you, from my Hamodia article, it is clear that the situation is getting worse by the day until we see a decision or direction from Hagedolim, remind ourselves, the readers, etc., don't go into the draft, etc. So I hear what you're saying in terms of presentation. It sounds very good, a rosy picture, but 150 Charedim in a brigade is not changing a country where you have an article here talking about sanctions over here. Don't enlist. So it sounds like rather too rosy, or rather too. I'm not sure whether that's fair to say that this unit is going to make all the difference. We've seen Haredi units before.
No, well, we haven't seen Haredi brigades before. This is something entirely new. The problem with the old version, you see, David, I'll tell you, and you're asking a good question, so I'll have to give you a good answer. You see, the army happens to be the most thorny and the most sticky part of Haredi participation in Israel. But if we look at the other elements of Haredi integration into Israel, then we'll see that they didn't come from Hamodia. It wasn't published in Hamodia, oh, let's set up Mamlachti Haredi schools. Everyone go to Mamlachti Haredi schools. And that's why we're finding ourselves today with 10% of Haredi society sending to Mamlachti Haredi schools. You know how that happened? It was notwithstanding, it was despite the very same article that you're reading now in Hamodia against army conscription. You can read it from this year and last year, the same thing against the Mamlachti Haredi schools. And nevertheless, they're thriving, they're developing. Every year they're doubling in their proportions, meaning it's an impressive project. It's still small. I'm not saying we're still far from where I think we need to be. And you know what? It should be a slow process. I would put the brakes on if this was an overnight revolution, because an overnight revolution would mean the implicit, the inevitable loss of what Haredi leaders and Haredi society has managed to preserve over many, many decades. And it's impressive, and we don't want to lose all of that. It would be a crying shame. I think it doesn't want to be an overnight everyone in. But just like the schools is a process which is developing solidly, not overnight, and perhaps we want to accelerate the pace. I'm not saying we don't, but it's happening. And the same is true of women's employment, the same is true of men's employment. It's all processes that have been taking place. The same, God willing, will happen with the army. The army, it's true, it's behind the others, because the army has never been interested in Charedim, and it's been very difficult. Every day in Netzach Yehuda, not now, but in the past years, every day we would have issues of girls coming into units. We would have everyday issues of problems with boys being sent out of the out of their division to go with whatever it is with secular soldiers elsewhere. The army just didn't care, and of course this built a lack of trust. And that lack of trust is absolutely justified. The army does need to earn the trust of the Charedim.
Can I ask you, sorry, a direct question? When do you actually think that the Gedolim Rosh Yeshivas, the so-called Gedolim of that we recognize as being the Gedolim of the Haredi world, will come out and say, Rabbi Yehoshua Pfeffer, we back you. We think our Bochum should go out from Chevron and Ponovich and Slobodka and should go into the army? When do you expect those Rosh Yeshivas, the great Rosh Yeshivas of the Haredi world, and for that matter, the Rebbes of the Hasidic world, will actually say, go into the army?
I want to be humble about this. I don't know the Hasidic world intimately enough. I know that there are some Rebbes who are more encouraging, some less. I don't know them well enough. But I can tell you about the Rosh Yeshivas, absolutely. The answer is never. Never, ever, ever, never.
So absolutely. How is this ever going to happen?
Well, just like the schools has happened. Rabbi say, we have to understand something, David and everyone else. We have to understand how things happen within Haredi society. The answer is not top down. In fact, nothing or exceedingly little happens top down. Things happen from the field. The field has a mind of its own. The field has a dynamic of its own. How did we get to the situation where Rav Moshe Hirsch a few months ago started saying, well, Rabbi Say, you know, I'd like to tell you that he made some very ahistoric statement. He said, for the last 100 years, we Charedim haven't gone to work. But now I see that there are also Charedim at work, and we have to hug them in. We have to embrace them to make sure they vote for the right political parties. He didn't say that. I'm adding that. What made him say that? What was it? Some change of heart? Did he speak to David Rapson, who inspired him to? No, he didn't speak, not to me. I mean, I would speak to him regularly, so he did speak to me. But it wasn't because I persuaded him. It was because the reality changed. And ultimately, the leadership is not, the leadership, unfortunately, is distant from the reality of what's happening in Haredi society, but not that distant. And there comes a time when those changes that take place from the field just become the norm. And then there's no choice but to accept it. Well, what happened with Haredi academic colleges? You know, the Gedolim were bashing them in Hamodia week by week. Chas v'shalom, you know, there's so much money to be lost over here. There's so much control to be lost over here. And there's a spiritual question. What's going to happen with our girls who are studying in all of these academic colleges? And yet today, large percentages, I don't know the precise percentages, 30, I don't know exactly how, but go on to study in academic colleges. Why? Because the Haredi space, the field, the people, it's bottom up, it's a movement. It's not coming from Gedolim. I always get this question, oh, what about the Gedolim? I appreciate the question. Of course, Gedolim have a very sanctified and important place. That's not where the changes come from. It's not certainly not where all of the field that's taking place, and it's not where the changes in the army will come from either. Now, David is right. At the moment, 150 is not much. Of course, the Charedim are not only in Chashmonaim. There's another 150 in Magav, and there's another several hundred in Netzach Yehuda, and in Palgat HaNegev, and in the Jobnikim in Palmachim, in the Air Force, and in many places. You know what? There's 250 Charedim that just joined last week a new cohort of Kodkod, which is a technological part of army where people do programming. And is that good enough? No, of course we need combat. Of course we need everything. But all
we've got another 3 minutes left. I just want to ask you, Professor, two important questions. Question number one is, how long will this process take? In how long, obviously you're not a novi, how long do you think we will find that there will become far more prevalent than 150 here and 250 here and 100 there? How long will that take? And secondly, do you envisage the bottom-up method that you're describing, that the Gedolim, because ultimately, if a Godel and Rosh Yeshivas are going to come out with Charedim and this, that, and the other, it will have an effect. When do you think they are silent on some Haredi colleges and that and the other? When will that happen, that they will actually not react and not actually, as is going on at the moment, I see my full page in the Hamadiyah, sanctions, etc., on people going through this? How long is your time span that you can see what goes on? And the third question is, sorry, I said two, but the third question is, how long will secular Israeli, or for that matter, Dati Leumi society, be prepared to put up with the fact that Charedim, and that's political, etc., will not be going in the army? So those three, if you can wrap up in the next few minutes, just to tell us those questions, I think will be very helpful.
Well, how long will it take? Obviously, depends on what you define as "quote unquote" success. But let me just say the following. You know, one of the major issues is not just what the Charedim want. It's also what does Israel want. You see, some are canvassing for the recruitment of Charedim under the slogan Shivyon Banetel. What does Shivyon Banetel mean? Equality in sharing the burden. And then the goal, the aim, the target is absolute equality. We want sameness, equality. And anything that's not equality isn't good enough. Now, is that really true? Of course it's not true, because there's no such thing as absolute equality. Hesder is not equal to non-Hesder. Tel Aviv is not equal to Modi'in. Modi'in is 93% conscription, and Tel Aviv has far lower conscription rates than Modi'in. And women are not equal to men in terms of conscription, so there is no equality. So the Shivyon Banetel argument, I think, is, first of all, I appreciate why people say there needs to be more equality, but I don't think that should be the ultimate aim. And when will we reach equality? I don't think that's the point. I think that there are some within the religious Zionist community, of course, that there are many there who are very angry too, but there are some within the religious Zionist community who appreciate that point. And they say, you know what, we don't want to invite the Charedim in terms of Shivyon Banetel. We'd like to invite the Charedim in terms of Achva. Achva means brotherhood. We'd like to see the Charedim be our brothers. And being brothers means that you participate, that you're a part of it, that you care, that you're a part of the army, that you're a part of Israel, that it's not this identity, this disparate, distinct, divisive sense of belonging, sense of identity, to the degree that the army is their responsibility and it's not our responsibility. And when the invitation, or when the challenge is stated in those terms, in terms of belonging and participation and brotherhood, rather than in terms of absolute equality, then I could think of a process that would unfold over the next decade. I don't know the pace exactly, but there's a good start right now. It's not going to be a matter of days. It's not going to be a matter of months. That would be what Margaret Thatcher used to say, cloud cuckoo land. That's not going to happen. It's going to take longer than that. But if we think about the space of a decade, if God willing, the Hashmonaim Brigade, the army gets its act together, which it's doing, it's making tremendous efforts in this area. If that trust is built, and if the Charedim go through this paradigm shift, it's not pashut. You know, you have a lot of questions, and then you try to find solutions before admitting a paradigm shift. It's not easy, but that's where we are. I would say the space of a decade, you know, let's revisit this in 10 years' time, and we'll see where we are. But I think that is a good timeline to reach this place of real belonging, of real participation.
We look forward to welcome you back, not in a decade, for a decade, perhaps to carry on the conversation and hear some of the solutions that have been that have come up. And Bez Hashem, we shouldn't need the army, and we should be able to create the achva, the shalom v'reus, not just amongst ourselves as the Charedim, but also amongst the Charedim and the whole of Israeli society. And the achva should come through not just through the military, but also in terms of the beautiful stories that we have heard, how the Charedim are very much part of Israeli society in the other way, the positivity that we hear, are very much sharing into some of the terrible stories that have taken place and how they have tried to help out with that as well. So I think that there's a lot of achva there in any event. Bez Hashem, that continue, and that may continue, and we'll see how that seeps through.
Thank you,
and I
David.
think the most interesting thing is that we've said tonight, in my view, is that this bottom-up approach rather than the top-down, which is a very interesting, which is almost a phenomenon that nobody would actually, a social scientist would have a field day, how that's working in terms of, so I think that's most unusual because the Haredi society as old was always a bottom-down approach rather than, it was always a top-down rather than a bottom-up. And it's interesting that this is now, this shift, as you've seen it in other areas, and that may turn out in that as well. Thank you very much.
Let me just finish with, well, thank you, David. Let me just finish with one point. It'll take half a minute, and that is, I obviously think in terms of what Israel needs from the Charedim, the participation, the achva, the economy, the army, and so on. But I also think in terms of what the Charedim can give Israel from themselves, from what we have, the values that are present within Haredi families, within Haredi communities, and thinking about the army. You know, I know you wished that we'll never need, that there'll come a time when we don't need an army. I think we'll always need an army, but in Mit Hashem, it should be an army of Tzivos Hashem. It should be an army of Ahaya Machanech HaKadosh. It should be an army that's elevated, and by the entry of Charedim, who on the one hand cling to those core values, but on the other take the responsibility, then in Mit Hashem will, at Tzrifim, oh, thank you, of course, I'm very familiar with the Tzrifim base, so thank you for the whoever's volunteering at Tzrifim. And those Charedim who are there, who are dedicated, should be able to elevate the army and the state to where it really needs to be, and together we'll stride forwards towards the destiny of the Jewish people. B'mihira v'yameinu.
Amen. And you should keep strong and you should keep well. And I can see the shutters behind you. I hope it's not necessarily for 24/7 security. I hope the Haredi world is still is not bashing down your doors. Keep strong. Chazak very much to you, and carry on all the wonderful things you're doing in terms of Haredi Chiloni relationships. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. And Madam Miriam, thank you. It's good to see you there.
Bye-bye.
All the best. David, thank you. Still recording? Madame, c'est un grand plaisir. No, I don't know if anyone can unmute themselves. But okay, well, thank you, everyone. And David, if anyone wants my connection, you can give people my contact. Okay, I'm not hiding.
We'll have to invite you back to Edgware again. I mean it, by the way, for real. Looking forward.
I look forward to that. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Well, bye bye for now.
Bye-bye.